Kia ora, I'm Nick Robertson, Senior Consultant here at Bill, and this is a copy of the presentation I gave to the Taituarā Community Planning Forum on Monday, the 29th of August. So just a warning up front that this probably isn't the most upbeat presentation I'll ever give, and I'm usually a lot more positive person than this presentation would have you believe. So first to begin with the global picture, the IMF has an increasingly gloomy and uncertain outlook with growth stalling across the US, Europe and China. The IMF expects global growth to slow to 2.9% in 2023. However, the World Bank is more pessimistic, expecting global growth to fall to this level this year. This follows 5.7% growth in 2021 as the world bounced back from COVID. The risks are overwhelmingly tilted towards the downside, with disruption to energy supplies, inflation, and tighter monetary policy expected to send the global economy into recession. The Ukraine war continues to have an impact on food supplies, pushing up prices. Well, this isn't great for domestic consumers, it is for our food producers. Embargoes in Russia have recently reduced oil supplies and increased prices. So these are starting to fall as a result of increased production elsewhere and global recession fears. So moving to the domestic front, labour shortages have made it easier for people to find new jobs and demand higher wages. This will cause business disruption with people leaving, new starters, and the loss of institutional knowledge. The rising cost of living makes industrial action more likely in collective bargaining negotiations. No matter the industry, employers are facing higher costs across the board, while employees struggle with the cost of living. Australia will continue to remain attractive for New Zealanders looking for new opportunities, and as I will get into, outward migration has already increased. Finally, climate change remains front of mind. Although I won't cover it directly, it will continue to have ongoing long-term impacts on the economy. This slide shows the results of the World Economic Forum survey of the global risks that have increased since COVID-19. Societal and environmental concerns are front of mind. At the top left in pink, social cohesion, mental health, and the cost of living are the three top concerns, followed by climate action, failure, and extreme weather being the two large green circles at the top. The short-term economic impact of COVID has been better than many, including me, expected. However, the collapse of production, trade, and employment has been quickly reversed, but historic data suggests long-term consequences should persist. Like pandemics of the past millennium, when COVID hit, it was expected that the world would face a prolonged economic downturn with low interest rates that may have lingered for 2 decades. However, this did not happen. There were three factors that limited this decline. The death toll relative to the total population was smaller due to modern medical care, public health measures, and vaccine development. COVID-19 primarily affected the elderly who are no longer in the workforce. This is a big difference from previous pandemics when people had much shorter life expectancies. Finally, the aggressive counter-pandemic fiscal responses boosted public debt. Domestically, this saw the Reserve Bank slash borrowing costs, which created ample room for the government to finance stimulus measures and allowed businesses to borrow. The global response meant what happened over 2 decades occurred over 2 years. Apologies for the graphs on this page, but it helps to tell the story of the inflation we're experiencing. At the top is the Consumer Price Index, the most common measure of inflation. It's at its highest level since the 90s, and as you can see, it hit hard and fast. The tool used to keep inflation under control is the official cash rate. As the graph on the bottom left shows, when the OCR was introduced in 1999, it was at 4.5%. It remained at or above this level for 19 years until 2008. When the GFC hit, the Reserve Bank dropped the OCR significantly and has never returned close to this 4.5 level since. Moving to look at the bottom right, having such a low official cash rate has kept interest rates extremely low, encouraging borrowing and spending, and a lot went into houses. With limited supply and a lag time to build, this ultimately drove up prices and resulted in significant untaxed capital gains from investments that did not contribute to improving productivity. But productivity is a story for another day. With the OCR remaining so low for so long, it didn't leave much room for the Reserve Bank and other central banks around the world to move when COVID hit. In the medium term, the Reserve Bank expects rising interest rates will reduce domestic demand, supply constraint will ease, and oil prices will fall. This will cause inflation to return to its 2% midpoint target by 2025. Inflation is not just limited to New Zealand, it's rampant across the world. Most of the countries we like to compare ourselves to reacted the same way and are now facing similar results. Russia's war on the Ukraine has also exacerbated inflation by interfering with the supply of fuels, grains, and fertilizers. Some examples of the inflation around the world include the USA, which peaked at 9.1% in June, but as a positive sign, it fell to 8.5% in July. Canada had a 39-year high with over 8% inflation. The UK has reached 10%, no doubt also partially due to Brexit, while Australia has reached 6.1% and is expected to hit 7.75% in the December quarter. So this graph shows inflation since 1990 in the OECD. And as you can see, the current period of inflation is well above anything experienced by most of the world's working age population. The green line shows all items, and yellow shows all items but excludes food and energy. The gap of about 3% shows the approximate direct impact of the war in the Ukraine. This slide here shows the global composition of GDP, which was 94 trillion in 2021. For comparison, global government debt is a record 71 trillion this year and expected to grow by 9.5%. This will be driven primarily by the US, Japan, and China, but most countries are expected to increase borrowing. So for those worries about New Zealand's debt to GDP ratios, we're in a relatively strong position compared to the rest of the world. I like this image because it shows the interconnectedness of the global economy. There's only so much we can do to control our own economic fortunes. As you can see up here, the bottom right of the red part of the circle, New Zealand is just a tiny proportion of the world. We ultimately just have to play the hand we're dealt, which is predominantly influenced by the US, China, and Europe. Rising prices are putting households under pressure. This is best illustrated by the results of the Retirement Commission survey of the issues New Zealanders perceive are important. While cost of living has long been top, it has increased since the end of last year. This appears to have come at the cost of other important issues, including housing affordability, the environment, and protecting the vulnerable. That cost of living has increased to almost 95% as a concern. Our vulnerable groups are most likely to bear the brunt of the economic downturn. They tend to have lower incomes and different attitudes to financial management, sometimes out of necessity. New Zealand Māori, Pacifica, and lower income households are more likely to have short-term debt products to help manage day-to-day spend, limiting their ability to save or invest for the future. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work here. To help these groups better navigate through the tough times we expect are ahead, they'll need more customised and targeted approaches and interventions. The return of tourism and summer is a bright spot on the horizon, but the threat of recession is real. GDP declined slightly in the March quarter, the first step towards 2 quarters of negative growth. However, indicators suggest GDP rebounded in the June quarter. Looking ahead to 2023, annual growth of just 1.4% is expected, so there isn't much wiggle room that things get worse. Over the medium term, higher interest rates, lower consumer confidence, and falling house prices will contribute to weaker economic growth. The latest Westpac McDermott Miller Consumer Confidence Index reveals consumer confidence has fallen to a record low. This is in line with the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index that shows planned spending near all-time lows. The proportion of households who say it's a good time to buy a major household item was a record low in this survey. Consumers are spending much less on services and general retail. Meanwhile, the Reserve Bank has signalled that more official cash rate increases are to come. These will potentially be more nails in the coffin of businesses hardest hit by COVID. The first thing to be cut from household budgets is non-essential spending. Retail, leisure, dining out, travel, essentially the things that make our city centres vibrant and attractive places. Combined with more people working from home and the COVID charge boost of online shopping, I have concerns for the future of our cities and town centres. This graph shows what many of us already are experiencing, and that is that the labour market remains extremely tight. This is reflected in labour costs rising at their fastest pace since 2008. In the year to March, average ordinary time hourly earnings increased by 4.8%. The labour cost index increased 3% in the year to March. The labour cost index is often compared to the consumer price index to see how wage growth compares with consumer inflation. Equivalent CPI growth over the same period was 6.9%. Wage inflation is expected to continue to increase. The Reserve Bank expects annual increase of the LCI to peak at 5% in 2023. However, this doesn't show the full picture. Over the last 10 years, wage levels have grown faster than inflation. This sudden flip will come as a shock for many who have become used to incomes growing faster than the costs of goods and services. This will play a role in the declining consumer confidence. Looking ahead to the medium term, one of the objectives of the OCR, alongside inflation, is maximum sustainable employment. And with it at just 3.3% at the moment, this looks to have been surpassed. Historically, long-term forecasts from Treasury see unemployment settle around 4%. Inflation is going to get down to that 2% midpoint range the Reserve Bank targets. It will require a rising unemployment rate. The Reserve Bank forecasts this could be up to 5%. Looking at international migration now, some fear that the period of globalisation and migration has already slowed. Domestically, there remains considerable uncertainty around the migration outlook, chiefly owing to the risk of a higher outflow of New Zealanders exploring overseas opportunities. As this graph shows, people are leaving now borders have reopened without MIQ. Annual net migration saw a loss of 11,500 for the year ended June, which follows a net loss of 6,500 in the year to June 2021. The long-term migration trend remains unclear. Over the medium term, the Reserve Bank expects population growth through natural increases and net immigration. However, the question remains whether people are still willing to move halfway around the world. Many businesses also complain about the ongoing difficulties with the immigration system, limiting their ability to attract and retain skilled workers. Now turning to housing affordability. This map shows the top 10 least affordable housing markets across the world. The scores are a median of household price over the median household income. Any city with a score greater than 5.1 or higher is considered severely unaffordable. Auckland currently sits 8, behind Sydney and Melbourne, but is more unaffordable than Los Angeles and Toronto. Back home, this image shows the incomes required to afford the median house increased significantly in all regions from 1992 to 2021. In Auckland and the Bay of Plenty, the median income required has almost tripled. The only regions where the median income required to buy the median house is below $85,000 are the West Coast and Southland. Housing remains mostly unaffordable, but prices have fallen by 7.9% since the peak in November 2021. Prices are projected to continue to decline throughout 2022 and 2023, with the Reserve Bank predicting house prices could fall up to 20% from this November peak. There are a number of reasons for this. Interest rates will make it harder for new buyers to make payments. Investors will leave the market as they can no longer receive the same level of capital gains or interest deductions. Construction demand looks to be easing rapidly, with declining new home consents and weak industry sentiment. And finally, it's unlikely the government will let prices fall too far for fear of a reverse wealth effect that is likely to grip the economy. The wealth effect describes homeowners' propensity to feel richer when their house prices rise, so they go out and spend more. When prices fall, the opposite occurs. The state of the housing market presents long-term concerns for inequality. Everyone's heard stories of people with multiple rental properties, or the influence of the bank of mum and dad for many getting first-time mortgages. There's a real risk that property and wealth becomes concentrated in those who have benefited from house price growth. When combined with the increasing cost of living, there's a real risk that we're setting ourselves up for a long-term inequality gap. Sorry, New Zealand is a terrible fit for slides, so I've had to break the country in half to present it. This map shows the regional differences in annual median household incomes compared to the national median of 104,700. The blue regions, Wellington and Auckland, are the only two where median incomes are greater than the national median. Wellington is 18.5% greater and Auckland 14%. The red regions show those that have median incomes that are less than the national median. The top of the South Island, down the west coast, and Otago are more than 15% below the national average. In the North Island, the Manawatu region is greater than 15% less than the median, while Northland was 13% below. Casting our minds back to the earlier affordability map, Canterbury and Southland are the only regions where the median household income is above the income level required to afford the median house. So this map shows the forecast changes in populations across the regions from 2023 to 2043. During this period, the national population is expected to grow by 16%, with 83% of the 833,000 additional people living in the North Island. 15 of the 16 regions are expected to grow. The exception is the West Coast, which is expected to lose 3.4% of its population. In the North Island, growth is expected to occur in and around the Golden Triangle, with Auckland growing by 24% to over 2.2 million, Waikato seeing 17% growth, and the Bay of Plenty and Northland both growing by about 14%. Across the bottom of the north, growth will be between 5 and 10%. In the South Island, growth will be predominantly around the major cities. Canterbury is forecasting 15% growth, Otago 11%, and Tasman 10%. So what does this mean for the regions? Well, it means supporting your people and your places. In terms of people, it's about supporting vulnerable communities going through tough economic times while attracting and retaining and developing skills. For our places, it's about keeping our towns and city centres vibrant. This means attracting inward investment and new employment opportunities and meeting resident needs and business needs while controlling the council budgets. Finally, it's essential we address housing supply, both affordability and affordability. Finally, I want to look at some of the good things that are happening. To show what targeted investment can achieve, I want to finish by showing the results of Bill's analysis of PGF investment for Gisborne District Council. The economic activity generated by the PGF increased Gisborne's GDP by 175.6 million, which is around 7.6% of the region's GDP. Total employment generated was 1,517 FTEs, equal to 6.6% of all full-time employment. These projects generated additional economic activity either due to earlier timing or greater size. Additionally, the council managed to complete virtually all its capital program, meaning there was little displacement. Thanks for watching, and please check out our website, bill.co.nz. If you haven't already, sign up for our quarterly BEB. Thanks. Bye.